Hey guys, my name is Andrew Davidson and welcome on back to another As Per My Ability video. As you can see, this is a very clandestine setup for my videos. In fact, most of this video is going to be handheld on my phone, so hopefully that doesn't bother you. But this is, well, first of all, welcome to the channel. My name is Andrew. Thank you for spending time with me today. Top of the morning to you. It is brand new, like in the morning. I just got up. I still have some of my PJs on, which I'm not gonna really show you at this point. If you are a gamer and you are a pretty hefty duty gamer, one of the responsibilities that falls on you is teaching. I teach a lot of board games. I have videos and I have blogs. I have a bunch of content on how I like to teach games. Basically kind of an outline of what I use, although to quote from Pirates of the Caribbean, it's more like a guideline than any actual rules, because you know every game is wired a little differently, so you can't just create a 100% template. I think you guys would probably agree with me on that one, but I have written plenty of times and I've done videos on the template of what I like to use. Today I'm going to be talking about Ark Nova, an incredibly popular game that is about building your own zoo, and I've been thinking about how to best teach such a whopping tough game. I mean, Terraforming Mars, which is what the game is being related to. Some people are saying Ark Nova is replacing Terraforming Mars and, you know, they'll never play it again, or some are not saying that. Whatever, you get people on both sides of the fence. I definitely think that people out there in the gaming community would agree that Ark Nova is a step up in complexity compared to Terraforming Mars. And I figured I'd make a video about how I think Ark Nova should be taught, the best way that it should be taught, in my opinion. Now, most games you kind of move in a linear fashion, from how the game sets up, to what you do on your turn, to how you achieve the end game, or how the end game is triggered, and what the objectives are within whatever particular game you're playing. I found through some test runs and a whole lot of talking to myself that Ark Nova is best taught backwards. And so let me show you. Now, for full disclosure, as you will see in a moment, I do not have the game set up. This is not me walking you through all the aspects. I'm just basically giving an outline of this is where you should teach. You need to fill in the blanks when you actually teach it. This is more of how to teach. Start here, go here, go here. Are we cool? Everyone understand? Okay. So we're going to cut away to some handheld stuff, and we're going to show you how you can implement teaching Ark Nova in a backwards fashion. Hopefully you enjoy it. Hopefully it won't take too long, and yeah, I'll see you right back here in a bit. Welcome to teaching Ark Nova, at least what I consider in a backwards fashion. Now, a couple of things that you're going to note before I get into it. First of all, this is all on a handheld cell phone, so I apologize if some things don't end up in frame and things like that. Second of all, I do not have anything on the board really set up. I have a few tokens placed out, and down here's a few cards, but that's about it. Which brings us to the next thing. This video is not an actual how to play. It is basically for people that are already teaching the game, to give them a new structure of how to teach the game in a backwards fashion. Now, normally, as I already said, I'm going to restate my point. When you teach games, you start off with the name of the game, the theme, whether if it's cooperative, competitive, and the objective. Then you work towards what do you do on your turn, and then you implement what those things mean while you're while you're doing it. You throw it into the mix. Here I'm going to start backwards because normally people would want to start down here with player boards. That's how I do viticulture. That's kind of how I do terraforming Mars. Whenever there's multiple boards, like Through the Ages is another one. Kind of start here, start with your cards. You start with what you do on your turn. So in a backwards way, let's start at the end of the game. And so what you'll want to do first is you'll want to talk about the end condition, which is, of course, when the two tokens cross each other. And then from there on, move through talking about the 4 different tracks. Now, a lot of this is going to not make sense to your audience, and so you need to preface by saying, this will make more sense in a moment. But you talk about the appeal track first. Talk about the conservation track, which is in green. Again, I'm assuming you know all this stuff already. Then talk about the reputation track that moves here, and then talk about the final track, which is the break track, and then what that all entails. Do all those in that order. Then you're going to want to preface by saying, that there's a distinction between cards, and that I would personally leave out anything that has to deal with upgraded cards, see the blue and the pink, or red, whatever. I would leave anything that has to deal with the red just out of the teach for now, because you want to get people playing, and you're already going to be teaching this game for 20 plus minutes. I would say that to your audience right away. The next thing to teach while focusing on this board is just very quickly going over some of these things. Again, I don't have these filled in, and then also what this means. That's going to bring in some cards, which actually I leave until the end. So you're just going to basically mention these things, point them out, and move on. Say, okay, we'll get to that at some point, but just remember what these icons do and what conservation does. The next aspect that you're going to want to move to is the association board, which again, nothing is filled in. I don't have anything set up. You're going to want to put out some cards, explain the associations, explain this aspect, explain the different spots you can go. I like to move in a left to right fashion and explain each one of these and give a little bit of a detail of why you might want to go there. Obviously answer any questions along the way. And again, any of the reds, pink, whatever stuff, just kind of say, we'll get to that. I'll kind of explain it when it becomes relevant. That's just my personal preference. If you want to incorporate all of the upgraded actions and aspects to the boards, I just like to keep the teach, as quick as possible, but with enough relevant information. So once you go through talking about your association or your workers, going here and what this does, going here and what this does, giving a little bit of context of having agreements with, what's the word I'm thinking of, continents, these different continents, what the universities and stuff could mean, what does this mean as far as that. Then move to the cards. Once you've gotten off the board, move the cards, because see, it leads you right into placing cube on a card, so that's a good smooth transition. Put out your setup cards, 3 of them or 4 if you have a 4-player game. Talk about what they mean when you put cubes on them, and go through some of the iconography. So you start with this board, start with the association board. You can also talk about, just give them the idea that cards can be played to add, what do they call it? Game end scoring cards that can happen throughout the game. Maybe you want to throw that out there, maybe not. Maybe you can just say, okay, that's something for whenever it comes up. The choice is up to you. Finally, you're going to get to the actual player board, which, remember, like I said, this is pretty much in reverse from how I normally teach games. I normally start here. I normally start with what's in front of the players and what they do on their turn. This is completely backwards. So start with the board and move from left to right, explaining everything as you go along. Explain the cubes that are going here, where they go, because they go out on the association board, which is over there. Explain that aspect, go through some of this iconography if you haven't already. Again, take questions along the way. Then move to the actual zoo portion of your board. Explain the enclosures, the difference between an empty one and a filled one, Also talk about, if they haven't played Terraforming Mars, you're definitely going to want to talk about when you cover something up, you get that ability, what the kiosks are, and what's the other one, pavilions are, explain the terrain. Then you're going to want to move here and explain kind of this stuff, or at least the blue portion, talking about the enclosures, how there are some specialty enclosures at some point with the reptile cage and the aviary. And then move here and talk about how you get these from the association board, which we've already talked about. So they'll be like, oh, okay, and how you place them in a fashion from bottom to top. Move here, same thing, bottom to top. Move here, explain these are how you unlock workers. Then talk about this area here where you keep your money, your workers, and then also talk about I just call them the X tokens that boost strength, and say, okay, well, what's strength all about? Boom, that moves us into the cards, which is normally where I would start with any other game when I teach. I would normally start with this aspect here, but this is probably one of the last things that I do when I teach. So then you're going to talk about the idea of strength and how on a turn you're going to like outjog a card, you're going to use the effect, and how everything's going to, move down. Or you could basically just move a card, not do its function, move the break and gain some money and stuff like that. Then you're going to want to go through each card and give an explanation of kind of, okay, this is what this card does, this with this one, this one, this one, this one. Again, personal preference. I don't even really get into explaining, okay, well, now let's look at the upgrade side. I basically figure, hey, the gamer can check these out while we play the game, because there can be a lot of downtime when you play. So once you go through all of this stuff with the cards, again, take some questions along the way. It's like, does any of this make sense? The longest one the one you're going to want to linger on the most is animals, because then you're going to want to grab some cards, maybe show some examples of how do I play an animal, how they relate with the enclosures, some of the prerequisites that animals have to have, go through the iconography there. So when you talk about animals, that's going to trigger like a big aside, if you will, and then you're going to jump and be like, let's look at some of these cards, for example, and then come back to explaining the other ones. So you might want to start with the animals card. You might want to leave it till last. That's totally up to you. That really doesn't matter within the framework of talking about cards. So we've gone through everything here, everything on the association board. We've gone left to right here through all of the cards. Now you're going to talk about basically some of the wrap-up stuff, like the little things that you at the very end, you'll just want to give a little bit more context to. So you want to talk about, like I said, this aspect here. You're going to bring this back and say, these are some of your starting bonus end of game cards. You don't have to discard down until someone gets here. So this brings us kind of full circle, because at that point when you're done, you can literally start dealing out the game end scoring cards and get the game started. It seems like a really good flow. It's like, hey, what I just talked about, we're going to do right now. And then we're going to get into the game and take questions from people. If they, draw their, you get dealt 8 starting cards, you discard down 4, take questions and stuff like that. So again, this wasn't obviously a how-to play video, but it's more of I think this method works fairly well, rather than, I've seen some people start here and start with what's in front of the player, which is totally fine. I don't fault that at all, because that's the way that I approach a lot of games, is dealing with what the player has to deal with, so that way they don't feel stupid. But I think Ark Nova works better if you get away from the player stuff and start at the end. So almost like teach the game in reverse. And so yeah, once again to recap, start with the 4 different tracks, go to the association board, go to the player board, go left to right, so that you kind of cover everything, talk about the cards, have a super massive break when you get to the animal cards. Break, that's a great word. Have a big aside when you get to the animals cards, so that you can show them how animals work, do the rest of the cards, then come back, wrap up. Okay, what do the break mean? What does this mean? What does this mean? And yeah, because then you can talk about income and then get started. Then start dealing out your things. And hopefully that's enough context and there's enough questions and people are kind of digging the game enough at that point to be able to say, well, let's go ahead and start Ark Nova. So that's kind of how I think, in my opinion, you can teach Ark Nova in reverse. Well, that's everything involved in how I think a good implementation of teaching Ark Nova could possibly go. Now again, this is all subjective. People teach the way that they want to teach. I just thought it would be fun to do some handheld video stuff and record a game, pretty much the first game that takes my outline and flips it backwards. And after doing it a few times, I realized this is probably the best way to teach this game. Just as something to throw out there on the internet. I know when you go on the internet, everyone's going to have their own opinion. Go for it. Comment below. Let me know. What do you think of teaching it this way? How do you teach games? And more specifically, how do you teach Ark Nova? Where do you start? Where do you end? How do you move through all the different, the vast amount of stuff? So that's everything I have. That's where I'm going to leave us. Once again, my name is Andrew Davidson. You've been watching As Per My Ability, and I look forward to seeing everyone back at the next video. Have a great day. Have a great morning.